Okay. All right. Well, it's good to see you again.
Likewise, it's a sunny day there wherever you are.
Yes,
In the Coast to
it
Coast
is a sunny day.
Coffeehouse.
Yeah, exactly. Is it sunny where you are too? Or it
It
looks
is
like it's
actually.
got nice greenery out where you are.
Yeah, no, it's coming in at a low angle because it's January. But I just bought a cat tree for my cat, and he's like up high and enjoying the rays.
Yeah, it's cold here. Well, actually today's not bad, but it went below zero,
Mm.
below 0 Celsius, the last few days here, which was cold. Like even like closed schools for a bit.
Because of the
Um,
cold.
Yeah, like one day was like there was no school for public schools because it was just too cold, I guess.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I remember burst pipes as a reason for closing schools in Michigan as a kid, and I was like, yeah, burst pipes, go for it. This is amazing.
yeah, terrible idea when you're an actual homeowner,
Right? No,
but
no, no,
yes,
not a good thing.
uh,
But as a kid,
but
it's
yeah,
great. Go sledding. Um,
it's I've been, one thing I wanted to talk about is yesterday I was in this clubhouse, and have you been doing clubhouse much more lately? Because I feel like there was a lot of clubhouse stuff, and then it kind of faded, and
yeah,
then it's back.
I've done a little, and then I've done some Twitter Spaces, but not super frequently.
Oh, I haven't done Twitter Spaces at
Ooh,
all yet.
that might be fun for us. So it's Clubhouse, but on Twitter, and the benefit of that is that uh, whenever someone logs onto Twitter, any of your Twitter follows, I guess you can see if they're in a space. So it's maybe more discoverable if you're already on Twitter.
Hmm, interesting. Very cool. Yeah, so when I was on this clubhouse yesterday, it was this clubhouse around like the ethics and economics of voice AI,
Hmm.
and particularly from a talent perspective. And it was kind of interesting. One of the things I was thinking, we talk a lot about like the ownership of the voice and all of that stuff from the talent's perspective. I definitely feel like there's this gap in between, though, in terms of like, when you think about the product of an AI voice and the fact that it's continuously kind of creating new product as a result of what it's been trained on.
Oh
So
yeah,
it's not like you take the recordings and then you're just now like selling those or making photocopies of those, right? You're adding some ingredient,
yeah.
or like some ingredient. You're adding all this other IP, and so where does that IP, like what? How do you protect that piece of it, and how do you explain to people? I was trying to look for an analogy, and actually, this is where I was going to ask you because
Hmm.
you're really good at analogies. Like, is there a good analogy of how I always come up with food analogies, like the sugar manufacturer doesn't own the candy. They get paid
Hmm.
for the candy, like for the sugar, but they don't have rights to the candy, and you don't have to constantly say this sugar was from this whatever.
Hmm.
You have to say sugar was in it, but you don't have to say which sugar, which factory you got it from. So um, I just wonder if there's an analogy that's more like people-ish, as opposed to food or ingredient based.
Yeah, well, I can think about people-ish. I was thinking somewhat like software as a service, where Salesforce isn't a particular like entry or profile or something like that. It's the suite of interactions that are possible based on how their software interacts with the customer's usage. Um,
Mm.
I don't know how far to take that analogy, but yeah. So the key is that you have sort of an algorithm. You have a model that can generate new content, and you want to distinguish the content that's generated from the ability to generate more content.
Yeah, I'm even thinking, I don't know if you've seen, there's all these new interactive museums now. So you can
Mm.
go into this interactive Frida Kahlo or interactive Van Gogh, right? And it's all immersive, and you see all the different artworks, and they're kind of coming in and out and fading, and like there's this 3D experience out of it. It's taking old art and but reconfiguring it. And so
Hmm.
there is some definite like for the artist for Van Gogh and his estate or whatever, there's still some usage of his original art, but now it's being completely transformed in this user experience. So what portion
Hmm.
of the rights to the new content are that of the original source? um,
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like the classic music. Like, can you remix, and when is it like copyright infringement or when is it new content.
But it's but that remix thing is almost like, well, I guess it's remix is like you're now creating something new, but it's not even like in those cases when you're talking about a recording or something like that and then remixing it in some other way, you're not transforming it. Like when you take a synthetic, when you take recordings from a talent or from a person and you make a synthetic voice from that, you're now emulating it using these mathematical formulas, but you're not actually using the bits of speech. We're no longer using the actual speech elements, right? And then saying, oh, you are still building it off of that, right? So it's almost like, if you're an artist and you are drawing a still life model, right? Is the artist who draws the still life person or the model, is the model like how much of the art that's created by the artist is the artist versus the thing that the artist was looking at to create that, right? There's no perfect analogy. I've been sort of trying to come up with this to help people understand that piece of it.
I mean, my assumption, but I guess I'll just ask, is like you're thinking about the relationship between voice talent and TTS.
I am, and I'm thinking about, I definitely feel like there needs to be some relationship in terms of, that it's that person's local likeness, and so I understand like some of the rights and issues around that, but I sometimes feel like there's an overreach in thinking about that model as if you're just taking whatever this person produced and just like making copies of it and reproducing it. There is an IP layer in between there that is almost like not even thought of because it's software. It's like, well, whatever. Yesterday I heard something which was like kind of surprised me. It was like, well, it should be, you make a model and it should be able to work on any platform. It's like, but why? Why does it need to work on every platform?
Well, and also somebody has to do that work to like make it.
Yeah, somebody has to do that work.
Yeah.
Exactly. Somebody has to do the work to make the model in the first place. Somebody has to do all the R&D to kind of make it interoperable.
Yeah.
Why is that a given that should be the standard, right? Like I think we've kind of.
I'm hearing two different audiences. So, my sense is if you were talking to tech folks, they would be well on board with you and being like, yeah, all the values in the algorithm, like, sure, you got some base data, but that's just data, that's not the product. And then if you go talk to talent or, entertainment industry people or things like that, my guess is they think, well, the technology is just an elaboration of, my production. And I don't know how to bridge those two. It feels like two different sort of worldviews.
I think there's the truth is somewhere in the middle, right? It's not. It's a combo. It's not one or the other, and it's a new model, and it's very different than I think the process that was that existed before. Even the methods of synthesis, if you think about concatenative synthesis, where it's actually gluing together little bits of speech, right, that were recorded, that is far closer to actually produced by this person. And now when we talk about the neural algorithms, they are not actually that person. You know what I mean? Yep. What's created is, it's based on that person.
I mean, it's almost like inspiration. So I was watching impressions yesterday, and these comedians who do impressions of other people, like, what say does the original person having an impression done of them, like, have over these impressions? Like, it's, hey, I'm going to talk like Mitch Hedberg or something, like, I don't know. Whoever.
They should have some say because it's so close.
Yeah.
But I think that I think when you start saying, well, all of it is mine, even though you've done something to it, that's the place where it doesn't seem reasonable to me.
I keep coming back to the politics, or basically power. And if you have a company the size of Apple getting some voice data from somebody who is, I don't know, on Upwork and getting a couple hundred, I mean, I doubt that this is how it happens, but the power differentials are so strong that the voice talent probably doesn't have too much say. Or now, decades later, like the voice talent is so different from how it's being used, there's probably not a lot of recourse. My sense is like, one thing that makes Vocal ID a bit different is how much you work with current voice talent. And yeah, they care about their product, which is their voice, and
Yeah.
that plays out in, and I talk probably more on the like straight tech side, and people implement TTS. I don't think people think about the talent behind it at all. I think it's just, oh, it's the Emily voice from Kepstrel, and you're like, is
Yeah.
there a human there? I don't know, like.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. Yep.
So
Yeah.
it's an
Yeah. I
yeah.
think. Yeah, I've been trying to just figure out that like I totally hear the argument that it's my vocal likeness, you're building on me, that's that I get some royalties out of it. I think what I'm trying to understand is how do we help people understand all of what that goes into, creating that voice,
Yeah.
and then all of what it takes to maintain it and all of that. So like
Yeah.
the analogy is not a clean one of like, oh, I made that recording and now you're just selling copies of it and you're cutting me out,
I
because
wonder
that's not true.
I I wonder how you would measure the relative value of the thing being purchased. And it may vary by voice, it may vary by TTS generator company and all that. But if somebody paid, $1,000 a month for a voice, or 20,000, I don't know how much actually these cost, but uh, you know, are they buying it because that voice, the original voice, is so unique and clear, or something like that, or are they buying it because you've created a model that can generate new content that's as clear as the original voice, or that you've made it accessible with APIs and all those other sort of tech stack things. And it's sort of what I'm hearing behind the scenes is you've got a product that has multiple people putting their efforts into generating it. Where do you draw the line between who gets what, or like what proportion?
Yeah, and also just kind of like, and I definitely feel like people shouldn't be, you can't make a voice say something if people don't. If it sounds like me, I don't want someone to like, puppeteer me to say something whenever I want.
Yeah, yeah.
It just it's such a fine line. We've got to figure out how to thread that needle. And it's just an interesting conversation just around like you said, there are two camps, right? Or I don't know if I should say two camps necessarily, because I don't want to say that I think we're on the same page as the voice talent. But what we're trying to figure out is how do you explain some of the nuances around this, because it's actually more complicated than one can understand from the like it's and especially if you've done TTS jobs in the past, like where your voice samples were a little glued together and stuff. So it's a different like conceptually, neural models are hard to explain. Maybe that's what I'm trying to get to. And I'm and what they generate and how they are trained is all of that is so it'll be really interesting kind of how we start to come up with explanations for this kind of stuff. Anyways, that's very like a detailed thing I was thinking about.
It's fascinating.
Did you have a topic that you wanted to talk about today?
I had a couple I came up with. I mean, one maybe sort of segues from this, which is how do we measure TTS quality? And it's sort of related to measuring the value of the text to speech, which is what I was starting to think about from this last discussion. Like, is it the original source data that's really where a lot of the value lives? Is it the way it's processed? But I think the answer to like the relative value and the quality, it's not exactly the same thing, but it depends on every audience. It depends on how much is being leveraged. But I almost want some sort of scoring algorithm where you could just run it through and you would get, like, my default would be you play it for people and you ask how natural it sounds or how empathetic it sounds or whatever, sort of qualitative judgments. But how can you scale that, and how can you know if you've got good quality product, and how can you prove that one product is better than another, so that people know going in, hey, we're getting something higher quality or lower quality? I mean, other than hearing it and being like, oh yeah, I don't like that as much.
Yeah, so understandability or intelligibility was, the metric that people always use, and the scores would always be like, oh, the understandability with, this particular voice is X or Y. And I feel like that's like now in the margin of error, right? It's like within 98%, 99%, it depends on the script you put in. Today there was a company that we're talking to that gave me a script, but the script had a typo in it. So, had a human not listened to it, it would have sounded silly. But so I think that there's all these, like, there's places where there could be, was the right comma in there? So was the script written for someone to read it out loud? Did anybody read it out loud when they, created the script? So how do we even know what it's supposed to sound like, right? Because like when you write something out, a script, you're using conventions of grammar and language and so on for written language, but you're not expecting it to be read out loud. And so you don't know. It's like a 17-word sentence, which has no breath group between, It's going to sound like horrible when you ask the system to say it out loud. So I think we've talked about this a lot, is how do you create an editor or something, some functionality where you can take written text and use ways in which you can then make that written text not morph it, but like adapt it or change it so that it could be more natural sounding as audible text.
How do you draw the line between what the model automatically does and what you enable people to manually do? Because I know Parrot Studio, you can go in and add SSML tags, you can make modifications to have it sound different ways. It seems like, somewhere you have to draw the line between, like, the model makes assumptions, because we think it'll sound best this way, and no, actually someone goes in and overrides and inserts a pause or a...
Well, I always say that it's honestly, I think text-to-speech, because speech is so, and you and I both know this, right? It's speech and language are both, there's nothing static about it. And the way we might use a particular sentence today with a particular, because of the context, maybe you have to be said in a special way, right? And tomorrow, if there's like some other pretext or whatever, that same sentence is going to be said in a different way. And so I think that assuming that you're just going to tap into these through an API and it's going to come out exactly like you want it and how you intended it, that doesn't even happen with human speech. So if you ask a human actor to record a particular advertisement or a chunk of audio, there's a director there directing them how to say it. So really, at the end of the day, this is a human-machine collaborative. That's why we created Parrot Studios, because the human has to be in there to be the orchestrator of how you want that machine to sound.
I guess it sort of seems like that puts some pressure on the human. If you just assume the machine can do it all, then you're like, oh, the human has hands off. It's just like, well, it's the technology's fault if it doesn't sound good. And now there needs to be like someone who can, there's a skill to being able to say, well, in this context, we want it to sound a little bit different. So I'm thinking,
that's what a designer does, right? That's what a conversational designer does. And I just don't believe that I don't think, I'm not even talking just today, but the contextual variation of speech, it's actually a big deal, right? And that means that we're not going to have an exact way every sentence is going to come out. And I don't know how my words are going to come out exactly, even as I speak them now, right? I have certain intentions, and there are certain ways I'm saying words because I'm trying to convey something, but it might hit you in the wrong way. It may not appeal. So I use facial expressions and ways to kind of guide, actually, Joseph didn't understand me, and all the back channel stuff. How is all that supposed to, unless the machine knows all of these things?
That's kind of creepy in its own way, I suppose. But
it's never going to do that. I think the standard is just, it's sort of, the assumption is if there is a complete turnkey solution to this, and the generation part is a heck of a lot harder than just trying to recognize speech. And even that is hard. Recognizing speech is you've got a ground truth of what was being said, and you're trying to figure out, whether you can identify that or not. When you're talking about generation, there's all sorts of, you can generate the right words, but not the right intentions.
Yes, I guess you're coming back to the quality. How do we measure quality? And word error rate is only a very small part of it. In some ways that you could automate, so there's benefits to saying, well, just run it through the speech recognition and see what your error rate is or something like that. But how could you systematize some of these other values, like context fit or comfort or naturalness or because I think we both believe that there is a lot of value in speech, in the speech signal beyond the word being recognized.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about how to communicate that to other people, how to systematize that message. Because I think the clearest way I can think of is you just play two things side by side and you say, this one's better, right? Um, but I would love to pin it down more.
But wouldn't it depend on the script too? So
I
I guess
know.
if you use maybe if you use the same script and that data was all the and in the same genre. So, for example, when we build a voice that's a customer service voice versus you build a voice that's maybe an advertising voice, the customer service scripts are usually very long. And they're quite sort of instructional, whereas an advertising script would probably be one where it's a lot more short sentences, get to the point. Maybe there's a lot more variation in pitch and loudness and all of that. And so I think that, how do you, unless you can control all of those things when you're comparing these apples to apples, you're not really comparing the same things if they're built on different data sets. Or if the models aren't similar.
Yeah, right. So there's a lot more at play than, at first blush. I can imagine you could have some downstream effect like customer satisfaction with the experience that would capture a lot of, did it fit the context? Did it fit expectation or something like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we've talked about this before, but
I'm going to simulate the coffee shop CD arrangement. Hold on.
One of the things I think we've talked about this before in terms of is the world ready? Oh my God, I'm like losing an arm here.
It's so sunny. It can't handle it.
It can't handle it. So is the world ready for full synthetic versus some kind of combo product?
Yeah.
So I think we have been focused so much on, we meaning, I'll just say for me, so much on trying to get people to change their diet, from just all live recording to starting to consume synthetic audio, let's say. But maybe the right thing to do is to introduce synthetic audio in little amounts, just like when you're introducing vegetables to your child, is you do it slowly. You don't go, you don't make a meat eater a vegetarian overnight. You slowly introduce the veggies, right? And so I think that's a lesson that's something that occurred to me. I've been thinking about this a lot. We've been talking a lot about hybrid and voice samples and so on, but I almost feel like it's been kind of like, you can also do this. Maybe it's not an also, maybe it's actually the starting point of, here, we give you the capability of doing this combo thing today.
Yeah, it feels like augmenting versus replacing, which is a big thing in the AI space. I keep coming back. I'm thinking about use cases where having the hybrid would be great. For example, a newscaster. So a newscaster does a live newscast every night, but maybe you want them to also be able to do, pitches in between, or maybe some customization for each region, or a whole bunch of different added content that you can't scale Peter Jennings, or I don't watch. I don't know if he's still around, but
Anderson Cooper.
Cooper.
I love Anderson Cooper to do all the headlines,
Right.
But he can't because he's doing a show all the time,
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. Well, definitely. What's really cool about this, I think, is we started off with augmenting people because they had some speech disabilities and so on, and really now we're augmenting people that are voice talent, not because they have any disabilities, but because they have limited time, right? And you're still, at the end of the day, it's still augmenting, which is super cool. I think it's
cool.
super cool.
Ooh, I kind of want to push this metaphor further and further, which is you can augment interfaces because nobody has voiced them. So the technology, I'm thinking, I was coming back to Anderson Cooper, doing the read aloud of an article on CNN. It's hey, I just love Anderson Cooper. I can't get enough. Bring that voice with me. So, yeah.
And augmenting, when you think about augmenting doesn't have to be um, what humans can do. Like if you think
Hmm.
about, the newest prosthetic legs that allow people, there's
Oh, those
debates
running
about
legs that look
people,
different,
yeah, the
like
springy ones.
yeah,
Like, is that person okay to run in the same Olympics as the person with, just human-bodied legs or whatever?
you know,
And why not, right? And so and the thing is, like, it doesn't have to be on, like, our ceiling, our gold standard doesn't need to just be what humans can do today. And I mean, of course, in terms of volume, when you have an AI voice doing it, the volume is infinite, right? The quality, so in one way, yes, it beats out a human for sure. In another way, maybe it's a little bit less exact today, but it's just going to get better or whatever. So there's an interesting thing about augmentation, is that you kind of start to,
hmm.
you're not, the comparison point is not always human, right? Like, the comparison point can be, you can push the ceiling further.
So in some ways that brings me back to the how do we measure the quality of a voice, which maybe there's better than human speech. I mean, sort of like when people listen to videos and they listen at double speed, like the human voice is too slow. We think too slow. Our articulators aren't fast enough. I mean, maybe some people can speak super fast, but there are use cases where people want the voice to do something that humans generally don't do. Double speed is an easy example, but yeah, maybe there's like a synthetic voice that's just so much better. Like, okay, I'm thinking of a sort of random example, but what if we actually preferred hearing fundamental frequency voices at 400 hertz instead of like more middle of the road
Yep.
adult human, and it was just soothing. It's like ASMR but with TTS or something. I
Yeah. But you know what? In the for kids that are on the autism spectrum,
hmm.
um, some of them actually do prefer a more robotic sounding voice
Oh,
than one that has more inflection, just because it's just a little less overwhelming,
yeah.
right? Um,
Hmm.
I think also we haven't really, when we talk about diversity of voice, we really haven't gotten to preferences of rate and
Hmm.
tempo. Those are things that our assumption, at least in the Western societies, is that voices that are more animated are more engaging. But
Hmm.
for whom,
Hmm.
right? And so, and for what context, and for what genre, it'd be really weird to read, I don't know, obituaries in like some expressive mode, right?
Yeah.
Or so there's certain use cases for where that those things sort of break down,
Yeah.
right? And I think in certain cultures, it's actually would probably be seen as you're selling them something that is false if you do speak too
I
quickly.
mean, yes, I assume there's huge cultural variation. I was coming to stand-up comedy because I think stand-up comedians play with these things a lot for different
Yeah,
kinds of effects, and some comedians are known for their deadpan presentation. They're still engaging, like that's their whole shtick.
yeah,
I saw Tig Notaro is uh, I think she's an interesting stand-up comedian. Her style is very even and slow, and but in some ways it's more engaging because I'm like, what's gonna happen? Like,
yeah,
you're
yeah,
you're
yeah.
leaving a lot like there for me to fill in the gaps and like anticipate and stuff like that. So
Because we've almost become a template culture. We kind of want everything as a template.
hmm.
We want, like, oh, what works best? Oh, tell me. Okay, I'm going to just type it in here and I'm going to just do this. We've
So
gotten used to templating.
I forget the neuroscientist, but I'm thinking about like music appreciation, and we tend to like music we've heard before, or at least is similar. If it's too different, I think it's a bit jarring. You're not sure what to do with it. But if you hear a song a second time, usually you're like, oh yeah, yeah, and that anticipation is so exciting. I almost wonder like
Ooh,
how that relates to voice. Um,
huh. Maybe that's actually something similar as what I was saying earlier, is you have to slowly introduce, like, you need
hmm.
multiple exposures before you're ready to accept.
Yep,
You're,
for new
there's
voices.
a multiple exposures before it goes, oh, that's interesting.
But
Um,
it also suggests that this augmentation of voices that are already known has huge value. So you already love Anderson Cooper. Well, not you, but say
yeah,
we
yeah.
love Anderson Cooper's voice, and hearing it read some random article is going to be way more engaging than hearing an unknown voice. There's value in that contrast. So augmenting known voices. I mean, I think this is certainly true of when you have a family member do recordings for. So I have a friend who does like a dementia use case where they record family members asking questions of their family members with dementia, and then hearing that voice is probably huge. Like it's noted.
Yeah. You know, I think it's always like something in the middle is always the right response. Like, so super famous, the expectation for the voice might be like so high that it can never meet the expectations of that person. And I've also heard for sometimes when we've tried to make voices for well-known celebrities, part of their team thinks it's a great idea, but then it later on it's like, well, then that would be, if someone found out it wasn't me, would that feel like it's not authentic, you know? So like for very famous people, I think that is a real concern. I think then there's the people that are not, they're well known, or their voice is preferred, voice talent, but they're not like famous people, right? And so maybe that is acceptable because it's sort of like there's something, I don't know, there's something tangibly accepted about their voice already by hundreds of people or whatever. We've heard that voice before, you know?
Yeah.
As opposed to something completely unusual, you know?
Right. Yeah. Somewhere in the middle might be the sweet spot for this kind of technology.
Yeah.
Sometimes when we're doing these recordings, I'm like, hold on, no, I just want to think for a second. It's like, no, I feel like I have this pressure to just like speak fluently. It's like, no, we can't have pauses, but no, hold on, I just want to think about that for a second. Yeah.
I'm gonna have to jump off soon, but I think that's a really, sorry, my headache is getting worse. It would be really cool to unpack that a bit more next week. I feel like we're starting to kind of get somewhere with it, but not next week, but whenever the next time we talk.
How would you define that? Because I'm hearing it as sort of the sweet spot for TTS in terms of novel versus not too many expectations. So yeah.
You know, it's not just even TTS, it's even like synthetically generated media. What is the sweet spot for it? Like whether it's music, it's audio, it's, you know, speech, it's even if you go all the way to, even if you think about things like CGI, right? So there is what is acceptable and in which context for what, right? I mean, we have no problem with a lot of educational things being simulated or entertainment aspects being simulated, but would we want that? I mean, maybe with metaverse now we have no problems with anything being simulated, you know?
What are the constraints? I mean, it kind of comes back to the old uncanny valley sort of thing too. Like, if you're thinking it's human but it's a little bit off, is that an issue with voice or more just faces, or how does the medium play a difference?
Or is that a bad thing?
If it feels uncanny?
Is that a bad thing? Because, you know, I hear like some comments now in terms of like, you should tell people that it's not right, it's not real.
Yeah.
Well, wouldn't that be a bummer when you're watching a movie, all of a sudden, you know, it says, this is not, you know, this is computer generated visuals, you know, like, I thought I was in the Matrix. Like, why are you telling me? Why are you why are you popping my bubble right now? You know, this is just computer generated voice. Like, who cares? You know?
I mean, it might depend on context where people don't care versus if you think you're actually having a personal relationship. I don't know. I can imagine places where people would be annoyed. But you make a good point that, yeah, like if you jump into a Spider-Man movie and talk about CGI, it's like, well, don't I know.
Like, nobody has to tell you that, oh no, he's actually not traveling from building to building. Right, yeah. You know, oh, that's just like an animation, you know. I don't know. There's a fine line between create like art and then controlling that, you know, part of it. Because it's just not it's something that we don't understand yet, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's wrong. So oftentimes I think there's this conflation between ethics and social norms.
Yeah. Ooh, interesting.
Yeah.
I feel like we're doing a lot of thinking and like what's going on inside a listener's head. and talking a little bit about what are the tools to find out, talking about the different factors that could play into that. Um, yeah, what's
Maybe
going
we talk about that. What is going on inside the listener's head? Like, in which parts, how, it'd be interesting to do is a survey or a study to ask listeners, because there's a lot of this
on?
like top down stuff right now on governance, but from the listener's perspective, what do they care about?
Ooh. So one of my papers, and I just last week was talking to another linguist who took a similar model, and I didn't create it, but basically you combine qualitative and quantitative. So if you're looking at a space, you could start with an assumption and test it at scale, but you don't even know if you're testing the right thing. So you might
Right.
just want to start by playing some TTS for people and be like, what do you think what do you hear in this voice? And then you'll get a
Yeah.
whole bunch of meanings, and you have to organize them in some meaningful way. And then you could start running controlled studies to figure out, okay, um, if somebody comments that this one feels unnatural, what's different about that voice? Let's go contrast just that thing. I mean, this is turning into a bigger research project, but I do think just soliciting impressions could be a really great starting point. And I don't know how much I've seen of that. I feel like there's a lot of casual commentary,
Yeah.
or like complaints on reviews or something like that, but
Hmm.
something more systematic where you get like a few hundred responses. Um, like, yeah, what do people think of TTS?
Hmm. And in what context? It's interesting. We've been using Mechanical Turk a lot to do some of those
Yeah.
intelligibility judgments. Um, you could run a Turk experiment relatively quickly and
Oh
ask
yeah,
them.
that was my
Um,
linguistics world. I did a lot of that
yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah. And even if there's no um, pretext that you're going to be listening to synthetic speech,
Hmm.
um, that what kind of speech? Like it's not actually about you don't draw attention to the like what the genesis of the speech is. You maybe ask questions about like, what did you hear? What did you like about that? Did this person feel like, was the intent met? Not about is it synthetic or not, right?
I mean, it raises all kinds of questions we could ask. So one of them might be, was the intent met, regardless of the voice's genesis? Another one might be, hey, this is a synthetic voice. What do you think of it?
Yeah.
Or if you heard, you know, maybe you play the original recording and you create a new sample from that voice talent, but with synthetic versions, and then you play them and you say, so how would you feel if you heard this together? Like, to basically test your hybrid hypothesis. Like,
Yeah.
play a few of them together and say, did you notice where it became synthetic? And if you did, what
Yeah.
did you think? What did you think? Was it a problem, or was it just like, oh yeah, that's just the way the world works now, or something like that?
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Because I think that we might be creating or thinking that there is this problem when we haven't even asked listeners about like what they're queuing into or what their purpose is, right? If it's for a GPS, for example, and it's like telling me the directions, I don't really care. I don't
Yeah.
need that to be a human
Yep.
live recording. Is it like a medical reading me my prescription bottle, like the CVS, the new thing that the CVS is doing in terms of the reading your prescription bottles. Okay, do I care? Like,
Hmm.
of course don't. I mean, maybe I don't care about it, maybe others do. But like, there's some things that are informational and there are some things that are relationship based, right? And this goes back to just like, what is the purpose of this talking thing?
And it would be great if we collected a bunch of feedback and that came out. So that's a hypothesis, and the researchers in us would probably love to get data that says, yeah, oh, I don't care that it's synthetic because I just want to get my pills delivered on time. And you're like,
Yeah.
okay. And other people might be like, I don't know if I trust that I'm going to get the right prescription delivered if the voice is, notably synthetic or something like that. I don't know. I mean, but yeah, I agree that the task-oriented nature of the interaction would make a difference. I expect, but I know you have to run, and I want you to feel well.
Thank you. This is always fun. It always gives me something to look forward to.